giving a round of applause, Mr. Badrinath to the stage. Everyone, please give a huge round of applause.
Hi everyone, this is Architect Badrinath. So today, there was a talk that we actually were taught to do how we do facades and how is the thing that the entire thing facade comes up. So these are some of our things that we have been known for, and this is how some of the awards that we have won. These are some of the brands we get associated with. These are some of the brands and projects that we did. So when we talk about space, we always believe in something what we call as space is human. And when we say that, it has something to do with there have been cases where we say that space could be more than what it is supposed to be. It could be probably part of history, it could be something which is unconventional, something which is nature or geometry. So let's say if we have something like a building. So does this building exist in, like, it's an inanimate object, but does it exist like a singular object in this space? No. We have something what we call a site, which is a two-dimensional space which the building sits onto. But are these two the only two ones which interact with each other? We have a community to respond, because end of the day, it's the community that we are building to. And is that's the only parameter? It also has to do with economy, because different economies, we have to be careful, mindful of what we're supposed to be doing. And then we have environment. So if you look at it, how layers keep on adding and how things keep on changing, and how many parameters keep coming into it. And when we say about where the confluence actually exists, the confluence exists something which is in between the spaces, something where we have to take care of site, community, building, economy, and environment. That's something in between. So we have started our practice and like a young practice that how we have started looking at things where we were having more challenges in terms of how do we address specific problems which are probably not taught in an architectural text. So when we look at it from a perspective where we are solving problems which we haven't thought of, because when we're doing from a perspective where it is from a college level, it is altogether a very different perspective. But when we see real life problems, real life solutions, they are very different from what we said in college. So we call our practice as street smart architecture. What it actually means is that when you're street smart, you have very limited resources and you actually have limited time, but still you have to crack something, the code that is very appealing and very fast and it is available for everyone. So that's how what we call as street smart business. And when we look at it, so this first project was actually the one, when you look at the top one, was the before and one that is after. This project we built about probably around 10 to 12 years before now. It's a pretty old project, but because it was about facades, I thought probably I would include this. So the idea was when it was something that was a project which was having two different old industrial buildings, and there was something that was needed to be addressed. So when we were doing it, it was how do we bring in, like, let's say we have a disused sort of a building which was an industrial building, and how can we add a connection? And probably like in this particular case, so the client asked us to do a screen which was predominantly in steel and glass, but that was not something that we were wanting to do. We wanted something to do with which could be more vibrant. It could be something that it's a south-facing facade, so it did not hit the sun too hard, so we need to be more liberal and more flexible into it. So the whole thing then it turned out as a ventilation facade. Then it talked about how could we reduce the cost even further. So then we talked about local methods of making this. It was something like where we could literally make all the panels within the factory to cut cost and bring it from elsewhere, and also to make a skill which was available and would also was connecting emotionally to the people who were working in the factory. So this is how it was there, because it was a very mundane environment where we were. So what we did was, it was an existing facade. We wrapped it up with a screen, and then we added this playful elements on top of it. So this is how when it was being constructed, it was being made. There were studies because it was a large plaza, but it was a disused industrial path. So it has a lot of broken paths, it was a lot of workshops and everything. So it was something that what we call as an urban acupuncture, wherein you could have some amount of goodness at some part of it and it should slowly have a contagious effect to reach other parts. So this is how it has come out to be. And this is another project where we were experimenting. When we done a certain experiment, then we moved on to this one, where we were having a similar challenge where we had very tight spaces where it was already laid out, and we could add something where the client actually said, I want something which would really stand out and to show something which is very promising, and also something that can be timeless. So when we look at it, where we talk about a building where the norms are so stringent that the building volume itself is a zoned area where you can't actually build anything outside it. So then, like there's a saying which says that when densification actually happens, gardens become terraces, terraces become balconies, and balconies become out to become windows. So similarly for commercial areas where we talk about forms and massings and elements, end of the day when there is high amounts of densification and high amounts of where real estate cost is too high, it actually comes down to areas where there could be pocketed facades where it could still feel like a terrace, and that's how like this idea was this particular plot. So here we created a very narrow balcony, but it was a narrow balcony, it was a west facade, so we had to reject a lot of west heat because it was, so we used, and this was in a new area, so we were exploring that because Chandigarh has been very characteristics of how concrete has been used in innovative ways of its time. So taking an inspiration from what Corbusier has did with concrete and trying testing our new limits. So we tried to look at thin concrete structures which were less than 3 inches, which has a single reinforcement structure. And so when we talk about thin concrete structures, it's actually pretty tricky to do it because it needs to have support, rest, and we're talking about earthquake zone 4. So it is pretty critical. So here the interweaving of these particular elements actually holds up the concrete structure as well. So this was the left was the initial idea where we thought of we will have something which is like a cheese tray or something like a honeybee where it can gently open up where we wanted and it should not open up where we didn't want it. So it was very subtle blended movement into it, and then we have a lot of greeneries on top. So this was how the construction was made. The interesting part was because we were using standard tools and implants, no specific molds. So it was very difficult for us to even to see the facade before it was fully built. So we had to wait for different times to see that how was the success of concrete was, how was particularly coming out. So it was good fun where we finally ended up doing something which was pretty meaningful, and this was pretty popular when it was finished, where even an institute like IAC actually did a research on it where how it could have been made. It was generated like AI generated. And this is how it has turned out. And then in the pursuit of when the whole idea of experimentation is once you get to a particular level, then you just want to push the boundary even further. So when we did something which was a two-dimensional slim concrete, we were thinking that, okay, what could we do if we can push the boundary a little more further and try to do something which was more geometrical, something it was for another project where we were experimenting where we could have different kind of box balconies for a building which could probably be a hotel. And because most of the time commercial buildings have an intent, but we don't actually have a end user most of the time. So it is obviously used for many a time for end user to come in and to use it as a space. So the idea was to have these balconies which are skewed, and it because we don't have a very big open space in the front, so you almost get to see it from the side. So the interesting part, when you see from it, it looks like something that boxes coming out which are gravity-defying structures. There in actually it was not, but it gives you that sense of illusion where it can give you very different and this was also because the southwest facade we had to cut a lot of heat from the south direction, the west direction. So that was how we could manage it and to bring it. So and how we managed it, because when we had to do something like this, because it was complicated and to do on a project where it was of a certain scale. So we had to look at modularity, where one module was turned around to become another module and then turned around to become another module. And so that we could reduce on the cost of the shuttering that was to be made by the first initial time. So this is how the final output looks like. This the space, how it looks like, and how different volumes, patterns come into it. And it's pretty, even today, it's like pretty exciting when you look at it, because though it was done few years ago, it still has that vibe of like being very iconic. This is another project where we try to look at a possibility where we were, because when people started looking at those buildings and everybody would want us, okay, what can you do next for us? But we want the similar kind of thing because we don't want to cut onto the area's efficiency and everything. So we were also like looking at what possibilities we could do it. So here, the idea was where we were experimented with triangulated geometries, where we could open it out in a similar way where like we were doing it. But this was for an other client where we were trying to, actually originally this design was done in three-dimensional object, but it was not viable for that particular project, so we had to find a new way. But client said, I really bought into the design, but can you make it workable? So that was the idea where we created a sense of something which is illusionary, like tessellated, but in reality it is like a flat piece. So this is also like, this is a school where we did in southern part of Punjab. So the idea is when client said like when somebody, because elevation is the first thing that introduces you to a person or to building. And so when he said that if somebody wants to drive past this particular road, should actually just stop it and walk into my particular premises and ask me like, what is it? So that was the whole idea. We were contemplating what would be done, and here it was like a huge box that comes out of the building and stands onto a very thin column. But does it to be functional? Yes, because end of the day we have to work with functional spaces here. We had given it as a covered open-air theatre, and the advantage of a covered open-air theatre is that because you can get, because schools are day facilities, so most of the time if you have a covered open-air amphitheatre, it works like 80% as an auditorium for many particular reasons, and it adds a very fraction cost of it. So this is how like this entire thing was envisioned and how we were building it. And here also like we were pushing the same boundaries onto a much larger scale building where we could see that, okay, can we push our boundaries? And this is when we started looking into curves and see that, okay, can we still look at something more in terms of facades and make it more sculptural and use curves. And this was for a school building where we were allowed to do curves. They really liked the facade and everything. But the original design was pretty complicated. It was a double bent curve structure, and double bent curve structure are only possible with concrete and high amount of specific shuttering that needs to be done. So when we then we simplified later because they still wanted the feel of it. So here, if you see, actually, like we have carefully integrated column structure into the white element, into the gray element, and used brickwork most of the areas to actually realize something like this, which on the face of it looks like it has been done in reinforced concrete. It actually is done in mostly 80% has been done in brickwork and only like supporting members that have been done. This is how like you can see how there were columns, frames, everything that was done. And this is again we're talking about earthquake zone 4 where we had to take care, apply norms. And this was part of interesting when we were trying to blend it with the rare structure. They were the basic structure the client wanted to, the structure consultant said, I need to have connections. Then we developed a kind of a connection system where it is not linear, rectilinear, which flows into the structure, and it forms also the sculptural part of it. This is again like we were talking about now. We not just about even about having concrete, but we thought about, okay, let's put a step further to do exposed concrete. So this entire facade is exposed concrete, wherein like earlier the concrete ones which we have seen were predominantly being done in a tone that was looking like concrete, which was plastered and being textured. But in this case, we were looking at can we push our level a bit further and to see where we can go ahead and to see how we can absorb facades with exposed concrete. There were issues with thickness. We had to deal with edges because it was exposed. You can't plaster them. So there were a new set of challenges that were to be done. And here we use like brick and also the facade that goes up like it was more like an actual pattern, which is like a vernoid kind of a pattern, and it flows up all over and wraps into it. And even when we did that, so even the interiors of it, because this whole talk was about facades, so I focus on what is on the inside, but mostly it's not just that they are facades, but they also have a character that goes inside it and it forms the whole character as it once. So this is our office that our own office where we work out of right now, and this was something that where we were looking at. It was a quite 58 feet facade, and it was a dense program that we had to fit in. And we were looking at. So we were looking to celebrate one thing that was natural, was the tree, and we were looking at, we protected it all throughout the construction, and we thought that how can we make something that it grows beautiful as the tree grows up. So if you look at it, so it actually looks like a shadow of the tree onto the facade. Yes, it has certain openings. So it looks as if there's a tree and you have lit it up, so it creates a shadow, and that's how the facade opens up. And these petals actually are which are dynamic, are more how they flow leaves that end up into it. So that was a whole idea when we have blended, and that's how we have integrated it. So here we were looking at rather from concrete, we actually shifted to how can we achieve which are more parametric elevations, which needs different kind of materiality, different blends into it. And the different challenges parametric is that most of the time when we do something which is too much with the machine, we also need to blend in what we can, because they all tend to look the same, and that's when where we could create a contrast between having bold forms and also something which is more fluidic, more how we can see here, it still looks like the scales of fishes, and how it blends even into the floor, and even on the inside, the curves actually go in and form the ceiling. So these were different trials we were looking at. The left image actually shows that there was a point in time where we were looking at, can we add more color into it? Can we make it more dynamic? Because it's also about when you're doing something, when you're doing bold facades, it also has to do with what would be the reaction rate, what would happen, it doesn't go well, what could be the chances of going, or things that could go wrong. So that's the reason where you need to deliberate and see what colors would go into it. And end of the day, we have achieved platinum rating for this building as such. So it is not just about the facade, it's also about how the entire thing works as a building. So these were some of the pictures where it has been made and how this erection has been started and how this entire thing has flown. And then we come to one project where we pushed our boundaries even further, where it was about double bent concrete structures, which we talked about earlier. So in this case, the challenge was all of them are double bent concrete structures, all of them bend in a certain way. So it was, we had to deal with different, though it was a sustainable building, but we were looking at different methods of bending concrete and to blend into it. And it was like a new kind of challenges where we had to always adjust, and many times it's difficult how you communicate it to the site, because when you have a line, it is just about 2 dimensions, but when you have your curve, it is about so many dimensions, and yet you don't get to the appropriateness of it. And how this was a pretty so each one was done step by step, and how this curve blending was there, because most of the time it's not about the drawing, it's also about how does it feel to look at it at that particular place, and what adjustments could be made. And because they were happening at a certain scale, it was even about what kind of curvature would be possible, what kind of elements would be there. So even if you look at the extreme right, it was a 3D printed model, which was very handy, which was built in office. It was 3D printed, given to the site to actually understand the nature of it. Because when we talk about curves, it's also about how you feel and how do you execute. It is not just about what the dimensions talk about. And there were interventions where we had to did geothermal in this, and this is how this entire output has come in. These are some of the facades where we have explored different dimensions in terms of angularity. This is a straight facade which is very clean, but at the same time gives you that sense of the longiness that was possible. So these are some of projects where we are still pushing our boundaries. Like this is coming up in Delhi where it's actually a memorial where it is double bent, but it is also bent to another level where it is actually twisted. So this is something that we are dealing with right now, where it's like a temple, it's like a samadhi, where it could be blended, and this is also a different scale. So this thing we are getting close to it now. The shell is up. We were going it further, and this would be like more like a different take on how they are like flower, but how petals actually unfold onto it as if like the like it's like a mother which gives you a kind of a hug. That was the kind of feeling that we would want it to generate. And this is in Punjab where we were actually exploring how we could do something which is an aspirational monument. This is a monument where you can climb up to feet, and there's a ramp that goes around, and you stand on top of it, and you can actually see it. So this is in a very remote part of Punjab, where this is a political monument. And so you see that how one project transits into other, and each time you try to push the boundaries and to pull. So in the end, it's more about as students of architecture, as what you look at it, is to do with wherever you start, you can keep pushing, working around. Like one of our client who have seen a previous project has asked us to do something for similar like in Dubai. So it's a different kind of project where we take into it and where we are working on it right now. So it keeps moving, and that's the whole journey of it, because this is how where we have got to here, and we still are exploring new methods and new ways where we could push our boundaries and see what, like how much more excitement can be created. Thank you.